Jeff Klausner from UCLA. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our monthly webinar on career development. And we are very lucky today to have Dean Tony Raj. Dr. Raj is a physician and a researcher at the St. John's Research Institute, and he has had a very dynamic and productive research, administrative, and mentoring career. He's also been a longstanding member of our GloCal UC Global Health Institute leadership team, and his current research interests have been more in the use of information communication technology related to a variety of different medical problems, but he's going to talk to us today about principally the work-life balance, which is always a very critical issue that comes up, and fellows and people in training often have questions, particularly when they see highly productive leaders, how they're able to keep all these different balls juggling in the air. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Raj.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff Klausner. That was a very kind words of your introduction, and I'm very happy to chat with this group of GloCal fellows. Good morning, everybody. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
You are.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to be talking about a difficult topic today, and I'm just going to put up my slides in a short while. I'm just sharing my screen so you'll see this here. I had earlier shared a couple of handouts, so I'm sure you have those readings with you, and my slides are basically a collation of some of those thoughts. Well, so here we are, trying to see if there's this whole personal and professional balance that we can maintain, especially in academia and in our research lives, and trying to balance personal, stuff as well. It's very difficult, but I'll do my best to make sure that I speak to you in about 30 minutes, and then we'll open out for questions after that. The content for today's talk is a brief introduction. We'll go through, do we really need to have a balance? Let's see about, I hear from other mid-career researchers, what do they have to say? And perhaps let's look at how does one address this issue? How have other mentors or senior faculty dealt with some of these issues? And we'll wrap up with a conclusion. To start with, yes, this whole balance between professional and personal life, refers to an individual's prioritization between professional and personal activities in his or her own life. The short phrase for it is work-life balance. You'll find a lot of it written over the last 2 decades or so, and in journals as well as in magazines. For example, the Harvard Business Review went on to say this: it's an elusive ideal, and at the worst, a complete myth. This was way back in 2014. A more recent magazine in India for women covered this article. This is as recent as Feb this year, with a title saying, "Does the fabled work-life balance really exist?" And there have been several other such articles written across various magazines. And if you actually look at the literature, there's plenty of stuff there about this difficult topic. Someone even wrote a book, Work-Life Balance for Dummies. Now, going back to this whole thing about work-life balance in research and academia, it can be very challenging. to define, as the boundaries are not always easy to draw, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this in some way or other, right? For example, one faculty said it should be defined as work hyphen rest of life, because she said work is a big part of my life and I love what I do. So you really can't, draw a line between that. And another faculty said, yes, sometimes passion can really blur the line between professional and personal lives. So this whole balance is a difficult topic, but it all depends on how, each individual, it's very personalized. And let's kind of look at the rest of the, slides to see how and what have other people done with this problem. Moving on to, do we really need a balance? You might have experienced something like this where you're totally overwhelmed and you're really wondering, how do I maintain this balance? More recently, and if you look at literature, there are a growing number of individuals in academia who are seeking a balance between personal and professional lives. This is perhaps influenced by several broader societal and technological changes. There are more number of women taking up careers in science, research, and academia. Even in St. John's, which is a medical school and typically a very large educational institution, we employ over 5,000 employees, and 70% of our employees are women, working in the healthcare profession. There's an increasing sense of family responsibilities and parenting among both men and women. And also, there's an increased expectation that men involve themselves more in housework and parenting. And to add to this problem, unlike several decades ago, today technology has made it so easy to bring work home. So technology penetration has caused this whole line to blur. I'd shared this article with you, but this is a survey done recently, around 2017. It was a global survey done on work-life balance, mainly focusing on academics and, and professional staff across several universities. Over 2,379 staff were surveyed, of which 85% were academics and 67% were female, mainly in the UK, about 17% in the US, about 5% from Australia, from universities in Australia, and the remaining were from 56 other countries spreading across 6 continents. This is published as a report. It's available online. I've shared the source here, plus the readings have been shared earlier. Let's look at what this survey, you know, brought about in terms of what do academics think about this whole work-life balance. If you look at the perception of workloads and work hours, typically, if you look at the blue bars are academics and the red bars are professionals or administrative staff and support staff who work in universities, very clearly the academics were spending much more time at work, you know, about 9, 10, or even more than 10 hours per day. If you looked at the time spent on weekends, on work, there were people spending between 3 hours to more than 12 hours on weekends. Focusing on the blue lines is the academics. What was their perception on mental health? In this case, the blue is male academics, the red is female academics, and professional staff were green bars. Well, most of them thought that there was a significant negative impact on their mental health. You know, there were some who felt that there was a reasonable amount of negative impact, and you know, a significant amount of them felt that there was a lot of negative impact on mental health. The other question in the survey was about how do children, having children, affect working hours or career development. And in this, on having children and what extent do they feel that they hold your career back, you'll see that the red bars here are female academics, yellow are the female professionals. I think there was a feeling, perception that yes, their careers definitely were held back due to the fact that they had children. If you looked at the number of hours that they expected to work or what kind of impact, they definitely would increase number of hours as well. Having children, how many hours extra per week that you would expect to work. So that's typically, again, the response from these various groups. On share of childcare, you know, typically, if you notice, there is still a perceived, a burden on the women. Females, both in academics as administrative professionals, felt that men were just doing about half or less than half of their share of childcare, and overall the burden, you know, ultimately was on women. In a different study, the Indian magazine that I put up earlier, it's very different. Again, cultural differences are there, and you'll notice that in India, there is support for children when women are working, but it comes not just from the spouse, it's also the parents, 23%, and the in-laws, about 31%. So overall, there is, a different kind of scenario in, a country like India. What was the perception of work-life balance in academics compared with friends in other professions? People in academics definitely felt that their work-life balance was a lot less than other professions their friends were working in. Now, there were narratives from the same report about maintaining friendships and maintaining relationships with friends. Many academics in particular seem to struggle with maintaining relationships with friends, which typically is a good indicator of work-life balance. For example, a senior lecturer at a university in Northwest England mentioned that he only managed to see most of his friends once a year because of the realities of working and family life, combined with the fact that he lives far away from his friends. Many people tend to feel isolated. Right. On another question about does this imbalance affect relationships? Now, 46% of academics say that their jobs get in the way or their ability to conduct a successful relationship a lot. Right? While 26% says that it affects it to a reasonable amount. So there's a significant amount of academics, the blue bars here, who feel that their ability to have a successful relationship is impacted by their work. And if they were asked, what would you expect to improve if you change careers? And they said, if we change careers, definitely we would like to improve our work-life balance. And some of them said we definitely like a lot less, stress in our work. Both these point to the same fact that yes, the more imbalance you have, likely to have more stress. So to the question, do we need a balance? This large survey, which was conducted about 2 years ago, definitely brought out the fact that there was increased academics across these various universities in Europe and US and Australia and other countries felt that increasing, there was definitely increasing work hours, there was increasing workloads, there was increased working on weekends. There was this, they felt that it worsened their mental health. 68% of respondents felt that. They mentioned that children, it affected, having children affected their careers and increased work hours. It also brought out this point that more than 50% of the burden of childcare was still with women who were academics. Work life balance and academics were worse off than their friends. Academic work affected maintaining friendships and affected maintaining successful relationships. This sums up to, an earlier study and several studies which are published of what can imbalance do. Studies have found that yes, having poor professional and personal life balance could lead to increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, all signs of stress, increased cortisol levels, depression, increased physical ill health, anxiety, and overall could cause burnout. In another study, uh, which was done earlier, and these are narratives from various faculty, many of them who were successful US recipients of the NIH K08 or K23 awards, right? At least 100 of them were interviewed. About 28 mentors were interviewed. Again, 59% were women in this cohort and 41% were men. Now, 63% of the female K award recipients indicated that work-life balance was a significant personal concern. And this is a paper published by Strong et al. In 2013. I'm just going to put up some narratives. This was a qualitative study primarily, and it's a good paper to read because it gives you, you know, perspectives of various researchers who are high achievers. They've actually, got good grants. They've been busy. So, for example, there are different themes that emerge. There are 5 themes that emerge with this qualitative study. One theme was the challenge and importance of work-life balance for the physician researcher. For example, there was this female K awardee who mentioned that the thing that I prize most, and I know I share this with other women in academic medicine, is really being able to have both family and a successful career. She said it's crazy busy with the two, but without the two, it just wouldn't be as satisfying and fulfilling. The other theme that came up was societal expectations, gender roles, and spousal dynamics. Many respondents felt that work-life balance issues were especially challenging for women, in part due to societal gender roles. There was a male K awardee who commented that I think it's a social conditioning. It's a social thing that we expect women to be more into the child raising than men to be less. The third theme that came up was the role of mentoring in achieving a balance. And this is an important aspect. For example, there were a couple of female respondents who commented that they'd modeled themselves after being mentored by role models who were women and who were researchers or clinician researchers. There was this female K awardee who said, I think I have learned from my mentors, in particular 2 female mentors. I've learned a lot in terms of working to be as productive as you can be with your academic career, but realizing that you still have to fit in the rest of your life as well, especially being a woman. The fourth was about institutional policies and practices and the flexibility of the academic work. I know many universities in the West and even in other countries across the world have definitely do have policies to ensure flexibility, especially for women. However, there is this perception, and I quote, you know, allowing me to work from home, I didn't have to do it on the table like I've heard from some people. We actually had it all written out on what days I should be there and what days I shouldn't be there. But there were other people who felt that if they were taking off from work, they felt, it was perceived by colleagues that, you know, they're just taking off because they're doing domestic work or doing childcare, and that wasn't seen in good light. So there are these perceptions, even though there are policies that exist, and that is leads to the other theme that came up was stereotypes and stigma. Although participants were high achieving individuals with K awards, a number of female respondents felt that women were more likely to be perceived as prioritizing family over work, even when this was not accurate. There was this awardee who quoted, who stated, there is just sort of an attitude about what women's priorities really are and what happens to women when they have babies. There is some willingness to accommodate, but there is also just a lot of pressure to show that it's not interfering with my work. So this was this study. I recommend you to read these narratives, and it makes good reading. But coming to, yes, how does one address this issue? It's not easy. As I mentioned, this is a difficult topic, right? There is no simple solution like one size fits all. It can be challenging to find a tailored solution because of the dynamic and highly personal nature of each one's professional and personal work. And, you know, research suggests, and I'm sure if you've seen some of your role models and mentors, that successful faculty and researchers are those who have a sense of control over their work and schedules. So let's look at some tips. I've just managed to collate stuff from all over, and I look forward to the discussion that we'll have on your thoughts and perhaps learn from you on how you've been managing some of these, you know, issues. So here are some tips that I've collated, and I'm happy to add, points from you as well. So one is to begin with self-reflection, and we'll come to that in a short while. Setting boundaries, we'll talk about this as well. Working smarter and not longer, if possible. Managing technology. Prioritizing self-care. And allowing, I quote it, distractions outside work, which is something I'll talk about in a short while. And of course, creating a support network, right? So let's begin with point one about self-reflection. Self-reflection is essential to self-care and one sense of balance. It's good to review goals on a short term, a long term, both professional and personal. Most of the time, we just review our short and long term career goals, and we don't look at our personal goals. It could be personal goals related to finance, to our personal well being, to marriage, etc. But it's good to look at them, reflect, put it down somewhere on paper, and kind of have it as a plan. I'm sure all of you have used an individual development plan at some point of time in your lives, but it's good to use this kind of template for both personal and professional. Set up short-term goals, long-term goals. So I'm just giving this as an example where this can be used as a template. There are other examples. I'm not sure if you've heard of the Wheel of Life, but you can Google this and you'll find a tool. The hyperlink on this slide deck has this, and I'll see if I can pull it up later or probably share it by email later. But the wheel of life is basically another way to reflect on your priorities, and it's a good tool to use to map out areas and to see if you're what kind of priority you're putting in. So you can actually map out your professional and personal life on this wheel and then see how it turns out. The other concept is setting boundaries. Setting boundaries or protected time for activities do help improve focus on both professional and personal activities. And this is really important. You can set out time for writing manuscripts, writing reports, and data analysis. Set up time for activities outside work, and learning to say no for activities that are not relevant. So these are things that I've just put together for setting boundaries. Work smarter. And this again brings us to the point of effective time management, which typically is usually learned through experience and through sometimes through mentorship. If you have good mentors who are very good at time management, it's something to really imbibe and learn from them. The University of Manitoba has a chart, and it's called a 168-hour week exercise, which typically it's an audit of your time, and it's good to do that at one point of time to just do in a week there are 168 hours, and typically what are we spending these hours on? It's a good exercise to just do at some point. But more importantly, using a calendar, a single calendar, to schedule your activities. Block out time for tasks, both personal and professional, and ensure that there's some amount of flexibility. Don't overschedule every hour of the day. Make sure you have little windows for flexibility, because there could be stuff that comes onto your plate which is priority and you need to address it. And then I'm sure you've heard of this metrics. You can use the Eisenhower decision metrics. This was used by the former president, and it was a very useful metrics, and I have it on my next slide. So on the left, what you see here is a snapshot of a typical calendar that I use. I use a Microsoft Outlook calendar, and you can see I have, the blue areas are the blocked out areas for academic work, which I lock out. The yellow areas are meetings. The orange areas are lectures that I take, and notice little windows between. Typically give a little flexibility between, sometimes there are no flexibility, it just fits into your calendar tightly, but ensure that you have little windows. The metrics on the right is the Eisenhower decision metrics, which is basically, I'm sure you've heard this before, prioritizing work depending on how important or how urgent it is. And stuff like, things which are really urgent, like a report has to go out and, the deadline is tomorrow. It comes into this, it's important and it's urgent. However, there could be things which are important but not urgent. And a lot of our planning should fall in here. You move it to this metrics, your upper right quadrant, and keep it there so that you can then work on it and schedule a time for it. Just don't move it in there and not address it. They could be urgent tasks but not too important, and those can be delegated. Right? Find someone who can help you do this work or delegate it to someone else. And of course, there are other trivial stuff that keep coming up on our plate, including, things like Netflix, WhatsApp, lots of Facebook stuff which keeps coming in messages, and we could ensure we park this in this and address it much later. The fourth point is managing technology. It's important to take cognizance of the fact that today technology influences in many ways, and email for that matter can outrun your day if you just keep looking at it. Many faculty answer email at scheduled times, and they turn off their email alerts on their computer so that they don't see new mail coming in. That's one way to ensure that they stay focused when they're doing focused work. Messaging apps. You can schedule times for apps, and given the fact that apps like WhatsApp and others are being used to communicate work related issues, sometimes it's like email. You can schedule a time and look at those apps and respond to it. Otherwise, you end up just looking at your phone too often. And it's best to turn off all alerts from unimportant apps on your phone or your other devices so that you don't get distracted when you're doing focused work. Also apply discretion on taking calls at work or at home. And I think that's important as well. It's part of setting your boundaries. And sometimes it's just good to be unplugged and stay out of technology for some time. Prioritizing self-care, basic things: ensure adequate sleep, exercise and nourishment. Have at least, and this is suggestions from faculty in another paper that I've shared, have at least one thing that you do which is not work related. It could be something that you're passionate about and set a time to do it. Could be yoga, dancing, Pilates, music, any other recreational activity or hobby. Address any physical or mental issues promptly. Don't push it into the right quadrant, upper quadrant of your priority list and leave it there, because then it'll become a point where it becomes urgent and important. There was one faculty who said distractions are good because sometimes working 12 hours at a stretch can really, suck you out. So they said time away from the office can give you a fresh perspective sometimes. So these distractions could be going out for a musical, going out for some recreational activities. That kind of gives you a fresh perspective. The other thing is to stay decluttered, and some people love their clutter, but it helps decluttering both at work and home. And there's this new thing about practicing mindfulness, about being in the moment, and that's something you can read up Google as well. A lot of stuff is being written about mindfulness and mindful practices these days. The last bit is to create a support network, both at work and at home. Building a network helps you really, form a cushion, especially when you have stressful, situations. Rely on colleagues, take inputs, discuss, brainstorm issues, and look out for them, because one day they look out for you when you're in a spot. Finding a supportive work environment is a good starting point, and at home as well, having a supportive partner or a spouse or family is also key. In conclusion, balancing professional and personal life is important for researchers, faculty, and physician researchers. Mentorship interventions, improved institutional policies, and addressing cultural aspects and encouraging a professional culture should improve this balance. Fortunately, women continue to bear the burden of this imbalance, and steps to reduce gender stereotyping and stigma about flexibility at work are required. Successful researchers are those who have a sense of control over their work and life and personal schedules, and time management is key to that. Self-reflection, goal setting, and time management are essential for a good balance between personal and professional lives. And overall, an individualized, person-centric approach is required to improve the balance between professional and personal life. So that's about it. And I'm happy to take questions at this point. I'm also putting up my email address. If you'd like to contact me after the session, I'm happy to respond to individual emails as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony, for that amazing talk. It was very helpful. This is Lucia. I have a question regarding the role of the institution you're in. So I think that plays a part of how easy it is to manage work-life balance. Do you have any advice as how to manage institutions that might not be as friendly as others?
Yeah, to give you an idea, uh, institutions in India are mandated, for example, in case of women, we have, there is a law that mandates maternity leave, which is 180 days, uh, which is 6 months. It's paid leave. And uh, of late, they've even started paternity leave for men uh, when their spouses have a baby. So that's not as much as 6 months, but it's much less. However, yes, so there are uh, policies which drive institutions and laws that drive institutions like ours in India. Within the institution, uh, you know, ensuring that researchers uh, are aware of the policies of the institution is important, and that's something which is done through our HR departments constantly and through our other offices. When people have issues, they reach out to us.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat. It's from Stephen. Um, his question is, how do you advise emerging researchers with administrative, research, and teaching roles, and family commitments?
Yeah, that is typically what a young researcher will encounter. You know, all these three. I think it's important to to actually make a plan and do some amount of self-reflection, do a time audit, and also look at that decision metrics which I shared. If you haven't used that, it'll be a good thing to uh, try and prioritize your work based on whether it's important and urgent. uh, I myself have approximately 25 years of teaching, and I've been through these different roles. uh, it is difficult at times, and it does definitely impact a family life at some point of time. But as I said, it's the balance is not a strict straight line balance. There are times when you work hard, and there are times when you compensate with your family. It's not like I have to devote X amount of time per week for this task. There are times when there are reports or papers, manuscripts which have to be done, or lab work. So it's equally important to look at an overall picture and prioritize, ensuring that it's not tilted completely one side to work, but overall it all averages out that you're spending time with family. And I said, scheduling time out of work is also equally important. We usually forget to do that because we just get home and we're so exhausted. But I think that's weekends and time out of work is important. Stephen, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much for that. Just maybe one more. How do you handle meetings? Because of when you're head of department, how do you handle meetings that are always regular
Yes.
or
So
sometimes unpredicted? Yeah.
thank you for that. Yeah, meetings are scheduled. Typically, if there are ad hoc meetings, I make sure that they're relevant and they fall into that quadrant of urgent and important. If meetings are, you know, urgent but not important, I do delegate this to colleagues who can handle the meeting, and ask them to make minutes. The important thing of meetings as well is to ensure that you have, you know, minutes and actionable points at the end of it, because sometimes we sit in meetings and there's a lot of brainstorming. At the end of it, there's no clear direction. And the key thing about meetings is, attend meetings and schedule them depending on the importance, uh, uh, as well as for planning. Planning meetings or brainstorming meetings are important, but you can schedule that as well. So it's important to use a calendar and plan out your meetings well in advance. If it's ad hoc and urgent, then you need to decide whether you need to attend it depending on the importance and the urgency, or whether you can delegate someone.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Any other questions? Or comments? Or maybe you want to share your experiences?
Maybe, sorry to come back again, but I have a comment, which is to really thank you so much for the presentation, and I liked the last part of the tips and the tools that you shared for using as an individual. I'm actually going to download them and have them somewhere and try to work out an evaluation of myself. I liked the time audit. I think the wheel of life. I will try those and the decision matrix. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Hi, I had a question. Based off of I was some of the slides that you had, they were really informative when it was telling us the breakdown between academics versus professionals. And I just kind of wanted to know your perspective or any background information on, particularly with the academics, the people who answered academics, the clinician scientists versus like the professors. Was there any difference in those outcomes at all? And are there certain struggles that physician scientists may struggle with versus like someone that's just strictly PhD?
Yeah, the report that I shared had just about 12% of physicians, scientists, or faculty who in that large study. So that would and the outcomes are not clearly demarcated in those reports. However, there's another narrative I shared, which was a blog post, uh, and that's about an interview with 7 or 8 uh, mid to senior level researchers who've been doing mainly uh, brain research and their perspectives. And that's a good narrative to read, uh, because the challenges are many, especially the brain researchers. They spend long hours uh, and you know trying to maintain family. So some of the narratives that I put out were pulled out from that as well. But I can share that on email again. I think I shared that earlier through Lucia. But the challenges of physicians are definitely different. You have your clinical work. Uh, you've got your patient management, which is a concern. There are stressors about that itself. And then having to keep up with research uh, and the other, teaching is always a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, from what I understand with from other colleagues who, I interact who work in other universities in the U.S. and in Europe, yes, a lot of them schedule, their times very carefully. They do spend long hours, but they're very strict with their boundaries as well. Weekends are weekends. Going out with, for example, taking their kids out to football, or ensuring that they their role in parenting doesn't get affected on the weekend. The weekdays are long because they're trying to compact and put in everything together, as you mentioned, clinical teaching as well as research. But yes, the boundaries that they draw are very strong, and they ensure that they do what they have to do at home uh, very sincerely. And no calls, no. So work doesn't really penetrate home sometimes, which is difficult again. But they've learned this, and over years of experience, they've ensured that they've struck this balance. And so, as I said, it's very individualized and very personalized for each one's job and role. But yes, ensuring that you draw these boundaries uh, might be difficult to draw boundaries when you're much more junior because you could have a superior who delegates a lot of work. But you know, you need to weigh out that, and if you have mentors, discuss this with mentors to see how you can depressurize a bit.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to read a comment from the chat. It's from Clara.
Okay.
So, to share an experience, I actually had to be caught up making a meal for my children as I took this call. So work-life balance is definitely something that we are faced with each time. Could you please share an experience, especially for female researchers, in what they felt they had to give up the most to make their careers work?
All right, I have an example from one of my mentees itself. Uh, she was doing a post-graduation here, and she had a very young kid, just about a year old. Actually, she had a kid during a post-graduation, so she took off from a postgraduate course and got back. And when she got back to work after 6 months of break, she just couldn't manage uh, her chores at home as well as keeping up with the course, her dissertation. And at one point, she just came up. I was a mentor. She came up to me and said, I'm just giving up. I just can't take this. Uh, support at home as well was a challenge. And I sat with her and chatted with her and finally understood certain areas that where she could have add some strengthen some, especially the support at home. And I'm happy to report to you that today she is an assistant professor in a different medical school. She completed a course. She ensured that she sailed through the end of it. So there are these bad patches that one goes through, and people definitely feel that they're too overwhelmed and anxious, and they decide to give up. But there are ways and means to tide it, and as I said, each individual can come up with a solution. It does need that cushion, that support both at home and at work, and definitely in the long run things will work out. So that's an example from my side.
Hi, I have a question. My name is James from Kenya.
Yeah.
Yes, Tony, thank you for a very important presentation on work-life balance. My question is, in the early stages of career, the opportunities that come up and these may be responsible for the imbalance. So like, where do you put the line to say this is enough to achieve work-life balance, given the fact that you are at the point where you're trying to launch your career, yet you do not know which opportunity is right for you. Of course, you're likely to get guidance, but when they keep coming, do you have an experience or something you can comment about when to say no to opportunities in early stages of career?
Yeah, so yeah, difficult question, because in early stages of career, you always, uh, want to make sure that you get the right opportunities. Uh, Sometimes it's gut instinct, but if you look at grant opportunities, for example, it takes at least, uh, when we apply for grants out here, 1 in 10 grant applications gets finally accepted. Sometimes 1 in 5. There's a lot of effort that goes into it. It's quite demotivating when you don't get, you know, selected, or your grant doesn't get shortlisted. But that's the life cycle of research. But as long as you understand that, and let's say you've got a couple of good grants, and you want to make sure that you your career is growing, it's important to finish what you have in hand, because I've noticed that sometimes young uh, researchers, and their enthusiasm to apply for more grants, they end up with, let's say, 3 to 4 grants, and they're unable to manage the logistics or execution of those research projects, because each of them comes with their own, you know, uh, work schedule and demand for time. This is something that you learn with, with time, but as you grow, and on each grant you can get people, and your teams will increase, and then that's when this whole delegation begins. So that quadrant, which on the decision metrics says, as you find new opportunities, you if you can delegate some of that to mentees whom you are mentoring, then it'll take off some of the pressure, and help you continue to grow, but also not put a cap and say, this is it. uh, this is where I'm going to draw the line. But there are times when you need to reflect, and that self-reflection is important to understand, where do you need to draw the line. Let's say if there are a couple of projects with a large snag list, things need to be done and sorted out. It's important to address those. Otherwise, that's going to increase blood pressure, increase anxiety, increase stress, because you're chasing milestones which become larger and larger as time, you know, as the time comes to a close. So yes, this is something that will come with experience. But as I said, using some of the principles that I've shared, using the decision metrics, you know, it's definitely, there's this interest to grow. But as you grow, if you can find a team or find mentees that uh, you can nurture and get them to grow, you will soon find yourself with a much larger team, which number of projects, and you'll be right on the top there, orchestrating maybe, 5 to 8 projects. Did it answer your question?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Thanks, James.
Okay, so thank you very much, Tony. If we don't have any other questions, I think this was a very good session, and thank you for your presentation.
Sure. Thank you. I'm really pleased to have taken this for all of you, and it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for your patient listening, and look forward to chatting with you at some point. Thank you.
Yes,
Have a
thank you.
good day.
And if you didn't see it, I attached Tony's presentation and the other readings he referenced to the calendar invite, and they're really good. So if you want to get a little bit deeper in the reading, please go to your calendar invite.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day to all too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.